This is Andy Quint, a senior writer for The Absolute Sound, and this is a video about Atmos, a topic about which I've written several times in tasks. I started making this video a few months ago, but didn't feel ready to post it and set it aside. As it turns out, I'm glad that I did, because about 2 weeks ago, my colleague Jason Methfessel, Chief Technology Officer for NextScreen, the company behind both The Absolute Sound and this YouTube channel, put up a video on this very subject about his initial experience with Atmos as employed for music listening as opposed to movie soundtracks. Jason's response was unenthusiastic, very different from my own over the past year or so. As is so often the case with newer technologies, things are happening in the Atmos music sphere at an ever-accelerating pace, and the delay in posting the video will allow me to be a bit more current and to address Jason's concerns regarding Atmos sound quality, as well as his skepticism regarding the potential audiophile market for the format. I'll also be discussing the challenge of incorporating immersive capabilities into a sound system that still will do full justice to traditional two-channel recordings.
Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. If you enjoy our videos, you might also like our other work for audiophiles and music lovers: written equipment reviews, editor's choice ratings, product news, and music reviews. Get the latest each week with a free subscription to our email newsletters. A link is in the description.
Spatiality is an important aspect of recorded sound and a key reality trigger for many audiophiles. Certainly, well-made stereo recordings utilizing tried and true purist microphone techniques can capture space quite effectively. We've also noted here that crosstalk cancellation, as provided by Dr. Edgar Chouari's Bach filter, can significantly improve upon those results. Then, of course, there's traditional multi-channel, which had its beginnings as quadraphonic in the late 1960s through mid-1970s, and subsequently returned 25 years later as a high-resolution medium with 5.0 or 5.1 SACDs and DVD audio discs, and eventually 24-bit PCM downloads. For the multi-channel enthusiasts such as myself, Atmos, which adds additional channels, could be a potential improvement over the usual 5 or 6 channels at ground level approach that's actually worked pretty well for more than 2 decades. To some extent, then, the term immersive is just a rebranding of what was once referred to as quad, surround sound, or multi-channel, as those 3 formats can all be immersive, in the sense of being enveloping. But modern immersive mixes aim more often to place a listener in the middle of a musical event, rather than just offering an enhanced sort of dimensionality. So we'll adopt here the common practice of referring to Atmos mixes as immersive mixes. As you saw and heard on Jason's video, on the playback side, an Atmos speaker configuration consists of a variable number of loudspeakers, including height channels. The standard nomenclature indicates how many ground level channels, subwoofers, and height channels there are, so 7.1.4 signifies 7 loudspeakers on the ground, 2 main front speakers, a center channel, 2 surrounds, and 2 rear channels, and a subwoofer and 4 height channels. A nice thing about Atmos is that it figures out how many playback channels you have and routes sounds accordingly, whether it's 7.1.4, 7.1.6, 5.1.2, or something else. Producers of immersive music recordings will utilize those height channels in different ways. Classical engineers making real-time recordings in a real space may employ a microphone array where the sound captured by one mic ends up in one loudspeaker. This can provide a highly specific aural rendering of the venue the recording was made in, studio with a 20-foot ceiling covered with acoustic tiles, as opposed to a cathedral with a 150-foot stone dome. Those creating immersive mixes of pop and rock genres that were synthetic to begin with will place certain tracks or groups of tracks into the height channels, which, apart from just being fun, can have the effect of clarifying what goes on at ground level, especially with complex mixes. Towards the end of his video, Jason expresses the opinion that the enhanced spatiality that Atmos brings to the table didn't impress him much, at least not in any game-changing way. He allowed that an Atmos mix of the small choral group Stile Antico singing Palestrina could fool him into believing that he was in a century-old cathedral in London, but good stereo could do it, quote, as well. Same thing with the clocks going off all over the place in time from Dark Side of the Moon. Here's where I want to be sure I understand what Jason means when he says that stereo can do it, quote, as well. Is there a comma in there, as in good stereo can also have a spaciousness that results in a sense of occasion? Or is Jason saying that good stereo can represent space as effectively as Atmos? Because in my opinion, there's really no contest between the effect from 2 channels and the effect from 10 of all those clocks ringing and clanging and bonging all at once. The Atmos mix creates a vast synthetic space that fills every cubic inch of the listening room and beyond. The collection of sounds is at once both more intelligible and more cacophonous than the stereo version. It's just not close. I wasn't at all surprised to hear Jason use the term gimmicky to describe his impression of Atmos mixes, because it's a word audiophiles devoted to spatial recordings hear all the time from those who are early on in their exposure to surround presentations. There are 2 basic approaches to making a multi-channel recording. The first, utilized with most jazz recordings and pretty much all classical, is to provide the sort of spatial cues in the mix that one would experience at a live performance in a specific venue. When it's done well, you get a sense of the dimensions of the venue and where the engineers have decided to place you, the listener, within that space. It might be up close, in row D, or a mid-hall perspective in row S, or it might be the sonic viewpoint of hearing a performance from right in the middle of the musicians. That's how Morten Lindberg, the engineer behind the Norwegian label 2L, makes many of his recordings. The liner notes for his discs and downloads usually include session photos and sometimes diagrams depicting exactly how the artists were situated in relationship to his microphone array. Here's an example from one of my favorite albums that Lindberg has made, an album titled Reflections that programs music by Benjamin Britten, Rafe Vaughan Williams, and Igor Stravinsky, played by an excellent small orchestra, the Trondheim Soloists. Here are some images from the booklet, both the seating diagrams used for the 3 weeks and a session photo that shows the players as they're deployed around the central microphone array. There's a photo of that microphone array as well. You can hear these physical arrangements of the musicians exactly as they appear in the photos and seating diagrams when listening to the Atmos mix of Reflections, and the sound is exceptionally vivid and immediate. It's not in any way gimmicky, but an honest representation of the performance as experienced from the admittedly privileged vantage point of that microphone array. A gimmicky multi-channel mix, by the way, would be one with an audience perspective recording of an orchestra where a clarinet suddenly appears over your right shoulder, or the trombone appears to be sitting where the concertmaster ought to be, or if those instrumental voices change position over the course of the performance. Over 20 years of listening to discrete multi-channel recordings and now Atmos mixes of classical repertoire, at this point that's several thousand albums, that just doesn't happen, and it certainly doesn't happen with 2L recordings. For the great bulk of pop and rock recordings, the nature of the production is what you'd call synthetic. The artists and their production team use studio techniques to create spatial effects. So the lead vocalist is front and center, the drums and bass are behind him, lead guitar to the left, keyboards to the right, even if those musicians were recorded at different times. With the additional channels Immersive can provide, these mixes can be even more imaginative and further reveal musical meaning. There's no better example than the Flaming Lips' best-selling album, Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots. There is so much musical information that the 2-channel version can occasionally be overwhelming. You can feel as though you're missing things, even if you've heard the stereo mix dozens of times. With the 5.1-channel DVD audio version that was released not long after the original CD, and especially with last year's Atmos mix, there's a clarification of the artist's intentions that can be quite exhilarating. I was especially surprised to hear Jason's feelings regarding the electronic music that he sampled, as this is a genre where composers and artists have found the possibilities of surround to advance the cause of their music, whether it's German club music, the duo known as Yellow, for example, or more contemplative ambient material, for example, an album called In Suspended Animation from a group called Dark Cinder Veneer on the prolific Dutch label TRPTK. So, what's going on? Jason's an experienced and thoughtful listener, and it occurs to me that something must be off if he's not connecting to the music as presented by Atmos. Two somethings, in fact. First of all, I'm not sure Jason's yet heard high-resolution Atmos, and not just the dumbed-down, highly compressed version, known as Dolby Digital Plus, that's streamed. It's not illegal or even strictly speaking inaccurate to call Dolby Digital Plus Atmos, but in the context of critical listening, it's misleading. With Dolby Digital Plus playback, everything comes out of the correct loudspeaker, but all those other audiophile aspects of consequence to both me and to Jason, such as tonality, dynamic nuance, dimensionality, imaging, and so on, are very much compromised in the streamed format. Expert engineers tell us that, from a technical standpoint, full Dolby True HD could be streamed, as available bandwidth is not a limiting factor at this point in time. Hopefully, that will be happening before long. Secondly, the Focal speaker system was, by Jason's depiction, entry level, which is probably good enough for film, but might not be sufficient for critical listening with music. That the height channels were simulated by transducers on top of the floor-standing channels that fired upwards to bounce sound off the ceiling is suboptimal. If you're going to dismiss Atmos on the basis of a subjective listening experience, the same sort of care that went into assembling your two-channel setup needs to go into assembling your immersive playback system. Let's have a look at mine. My listening room is a 15-foot by 15-foot space with a ceiling height that ranges from 10 to 12 feet. There's a hallway that leads off to one side near the front that minimizes issues with standing waves in this otherwise symmetric space. The Atmos system is currently 5.1.4, 5 floor-standing speakers, a powered subwoofer, and 4 height channels. They are all of a single brand, in this case Magico, which helps assure a consistent and unified tonal balance throughout the space and frequency range. There are differing schools of thought regarding location of the height speakers, including mounting them in the ceiling or high up on the walls, as I do. As noted above, some home theater users will place upward firing speakers on top of their main front and surround channels to generate a height component of the Atmos mix from a signal that's bounced off the ceiling. I don't recommend this for immersive music applications. The front main speakers are Magico M2s, my reference speakers for two-channel listening. The center channel is a Magico S3 Mark II, and as surrounds, I'm using a pair of S1 Mark IIs. The subwoofer is Magico's S-Sub, just one of them, and for height channels, I've mounted 4 Magico A1s, the manufacturer's smallest model, about 6 feet above the floor. 2 are on the front wall, canted inward and downward toward the sweet spot, and 2 are on the side walls, even with the listening position and canted slightly down. Note that the center channel is vertically oriented rather than horizontal, as is usually seen in a typical home theater setup, where it needs to be positioned below the screen. I feel this orientation assures that the tweeters and mid-range drivers of all 3 speakers in front of the listener are at approximately the same height, resulting in a more coherent sonic presentation. This necessitates the screen being placed higher on the front wall than would usually be the case. This is a compromise when I watch movies and TV, but one I choose to make as the system is used primarily for listening to music. Having electronics from one manufacturer, I believe, is less critical, and while I use a pair of Tidal Ferios monoblock power amps for my main front channels, there are 3 Passlabs XA60.8s for the center channel and the 2 surrounds, and a Parasound A52 Plus to power the 4 height channels. Likewise, the speaker cables range from 880 series to connect up the M2s to expensive in-wall product for the 4 height channels. For me, the listening position doesn't change when I switch from stereo to multi-channel on Atmos. The 10 speakers have had their levels set with the help of the processor's room correction software and fine-tuned with an SPL meter. For me, it was important that my system function optimally with stereo. Even a multi-channel enthusiast such as myself listens mostly to stereo. My reference two-channel system for digital sources is centered on a Tidal Contros DAC controller, as good a preamp DAC as you can get, that sends its analog output to the Tidal power amps to drive the M2s. Sources include a Sony Universal Disc Player used as a transport, and for stereo digital files, a Batis Reference 3 music computer. When I switch to multi-channel or Atmos, only one change is required. In lieu of the Contros, the multi-channel DAC controller is an Anthem AVM70, which receives local and streamed digital data from the Sony disc player and the Batis or an Apple TV unit. All that's necessary in order to change from stereo to 5.1 multi-channel or Atmos is to move the analog interconnects for the two front channels from the Contros to the Anthem. The process takes under a minute, maybe a bit longer if I choose to remove the center channel from the room for acoustic reasons. The retail cost of the immersive system I've just described is pretty high, more than $300,000. But get this, more than 70% of the cost of the system for 5.1.4 Actos playback is utilized for two-channel playback. It's not at all necessary to maintain an entirely separate system for immersive material. It can be blended successfully with a traditional two-channel audiophile rig that won't compromise the potential for well-made stereo recordings. Furthermore, that 70% number just mentioned holds for less costly systems. Whether your two-channel rig is worth $25,000, $50,000, or $100K, an additional 30% investment will get you Atmos sound quality at the performance level you've achieved with your stereo setup. So what's there to listen to in real Atmos? Well, if Jason's answer is not much, he has a point. It's probably less than 400 albums, and as of this date, I have approximately 160 in the high-resolution Dolby True HD format, either as Blu-ray discs or as MKV files. TAS will be publishing our inaugural list of what we feel are the most successful examples of Atmos mixes, and that will include broad genres of jazz, rock pop, classical, and electronica, and we promise to update the list episodically as the pace of the releases increases. My hope is that Jason will come across an audiophile in his neck of the woods with a passion for multi-channel and Atmos specifically, who has it set up optimally. Then I think there's a good chance that he may come away with a different opinion regarding the potential of the format. Thanks to Jason for encouraging this public discussion. It can be done civilly, even online, and to you for tuning into this TAS Audiophile Network video. As always, happy listening and hope to see you here again soon.